Today, I'd like to talk about dealing with difficult personalities at work and if you have your own business. And you know what? I'm going to include myself in this, and you should as well, at least think about it. So, I'll start with myself. Procrastination at times, particularly with certain tasks, which seem to fall under administration for the most part. And I know that sometimes we procrastinate because quite frankly, those tasks are not that important and are far enough in the future that we can avoid them. And my understanding is there's some sort of natural bias and reason that we do that based on our biology, etc. So let's just get that aside, and I've had another video blog about dealing with that, basically procrastination. And you know, I'm not the only person that's written about that, so you can find your own method. My best method is finding stuff that only takes, I'm going to spend 1 minute on the task, and that's it. For me, that's the best way. I also prioritize my day with simple 1 minute tasks, and with 1, 2, or 3 big tasks that I really want to work on that day. Sometimes those are part of a much larger campaign, which I have in mind. So it's one part of it. And a campaign is a 1 or 2 month project, or a full-on project, which could be up to a year or multi-year project. And once again, those little 1 minute tasks can be part of that. Sometimes it's you do something and then the next step, because you're waiting for a response, etc. Anyway, off to that difficult personality thing. I've worked with some people in my capital markets days, a couple of traders, for instance, and part of that was all show because they had to intimidate all the time. But having watched people scream at each other from 3 inches from each other's face for literally something regarding a price, which neither of them would ever remember now. And then half an hour later, those 2 guys that were screaming at each other and almost coming in fists. Yeah, you going out for drinks tonight? Yep, see you there. So, you know, it's a show. I don't even know if I would call it a testosterone show. It's almost more of a drama. And then there's the type of guy I dealt with in my last bank who, fascinatingly enough, did everything he could to undermine the people around him. And he sold up. He was literally every cliche you could put into a movie about how to be a horrible coworker, and he got away with it, and it was fascinating. And even the people that he was sucking up to a little higher up seemed to understand what was going on. What the irony of ironies is, the guy has a LinkedIn profile and doesn't even have his own name on it. So I'm almost wondering if there's something in his history. And he was a young guy in his early 20s when this occurred. So you almost wonder what's in his history, or he knows what he is. I would say he's a sociopath, but he didn't really have a lot of the tendencies. I just think he's just an asshole. So consequently, that's the guy to deal with. Now him, I underestimated royally. And my only excuse is that he had my daughter at the time, and I was quite distracted and, quite frankly, a little tired. I'm not neither here nor there, but definitely a problem and something I should have managed better if I tended to stay at that corporate job. Although, quite frankly, hated it. Paid well, of course, but didn't like it. That was the type of job where everyone almost would say in unison, if it wasn't for the money, I'd leave. And that's what we kept hearing over and over again. And unfortunately, to cope, you get into a lot of bad habits, a couple extra drinks too many times. The job required you to entertain a lot anyway, so there was always a little too much alcohol involved. But it was a difficult personalities. From an entrepreneurial standpoint, at the very least, You can vet people to a degree. Although if you read autobiographies of entrepreneurs, etc., sometimes they actually mention how even if you do everything right, you can still have a big blow up because of personality differences. A lot of those seem to be founding partners. I'm thinking of the McCain's in McCain's French fries, supplier of French fries at McDonald's and as well as supermarket products. So those were two brothers who started out friends with the Irvings in Atlantic Canada, and they actually worked for them, who decided to strike it out on their own, and then the Irvings would have nothing to do with them. We're talking the second generation here, not the original founder, K.C. Irving. And they started doing their fries, and it took off. Did really well. So anyway, it became time to succession, because Wallace and Harrison, and I believe Harrison was the older. Anyway, they basically had a falling out. They were even in the same building for a while, but they weren't talking to each other, which is sad because their houses were side by side in Florenceville, New Brunswick, at the top of the hill. So that went on for a while, and that was over Wallace's son not being given a management position, and I believe he actually had promoted his son to run the U.S. operations, and that was basically the break. Rumor has it that his son was a bit of an ass and would churn through people pretty bad, so once again, personality. And Wallace was the operations guy. He was the one who made the factories efficient, and Harrison, which was the sales guy and got new contracts, etc. We're going from the 50s, and this happened in the 90s. So anyway, they had a split. Wallace eventually took the money out of the company, or some of it out, and bought Maple Leaf Foods in Canada, and his son took over. So makes you wonder. I know there was a biography about it, and Harrison obviously didn't look too pleased. And I'd say I was sad, I guess would be a better answer about the situation. So that falls under tragedy. Now the difficult personality in that story wasn't the two brothers, it was more the son. And once again, it was rumor. Although my job at the time, I covered that account. So I sat in that off one of the cubicles of the treasurers, and specifically experienced the discomfort. And that company, ironically enough, people were almost forced to take sides. Can you imagine being a 30-year employee and knowing them and trying to reconcile that with your job? What if you chose the wrong side? You're in an area of the world where there's not a lot of jobs that pay that well, of that sophistication. That's the fallout. And I'm not even sure how long he ended up running Maple Leaf Foods, the son of Wallace. For several years. I don't recall much detail or anything discussing his management style. I think there was one idea he was pushed out a few years later. But once again, it's privately owned, so I think it's privately owned. Well, at the very least, Wallace had a controlling interest in it, if it was public. So maybe he had to temper down. Anyway, that's all.